The Orion's Edge was one of those space stations that never slept. It hung in the void like a glittering crown, its wide rings filled with merchants, travelers, and diplomats from 100 different worlds. Every corridor was alive with movement. Alien traders carrying strange-smelling spices, engineers in heavy suits repairing humming machinery, and security officers standing tall in polished armor. It was here, in this mix of cultures and chaos, that Lieutenant Jack Rains found himself attending another diplomatic reception. Jack had been on the station for 2 months, part of Earth's small delegation to the Galactic Accord. Humanity was still the newcomer among the stars. They had only joined the Accord 5 years ago, and most alien governments still treated humans like the new kid in class who didn't quite understand the rules. Jack didn't mind. He wasn't the kind of man to get offended easily, but he did notice how some aliens liked to test humans to see if they were worth taking seriously. Lyra was one of them. She was a young diplomat from the Thalorian Empire, a race whose skin sparkled like crystal under the light and whose voices carried a strange musical tone. Lyra was clever, quick-witted, and if Jack was honest, a little too amused by human awkwardness. She had a habit of asking questions that made him stumble for words, then smiling as if she'd just won a game. That Thursday evening, the station's main hall had been transformed into a place of shimmering decorations and slow, soft music. Delegates were gathered in small groups, speaking in low tones. Plates of alien delicacies floated on small hover trays between them. Jack stood near the central fountain, holding a glass of something purple that the servers swore was safe for humans. Lyra joined him, wearing the deep silver robes of her people, the fabric catching the light with every step. "You humans," she began with that teasing smile, "always so careful in choosing words. Do you fear that a wrong sentence will start a war?" Jack chuckled. "Well, considering some of the species here, I think one wrong sentence could start a war." Her eyes gleamed with amusement. "Then perhaps I should test you." They spoke for several minutes, drifting from topic to topic. Human sports, Thalorian art, and the strange smells coming from the Xeran food stand across the hall. Lyra leaned closer as if sharing a secret. "In Thalorian culture," she said, "we do not shake hands as you do. We have no need for such formal greetings." Jack grinned. "Then how do you greet someone you like?" Instead of answering with words, Lyra stepped even closer and, with a quick, playful motion, pressed her lips lightly against his cheek. It was the briefest of touches, like a feather brushing his skin. Jack froze for a heartbeat, surprised. Then he laughed softly. "Is that your way of saying hello?" But when he looked around, the mood in the room had changed. Several alien delegates had stopped talking entirely. A group of robed officials from the Yara Confederacy were whispering urgently. 2 of the human security officers near the doorway were staring with wide eyes. Even the music seemed quieter, though Jack suspected that was just his imagination. "What?" he asked, looking back at Lyra. Her playful smile faded, replaced by a look of startled realization. "Oh," she murmured. "I may have forgotten that humans do not know what that means." Jack tilted his head. "What does it mean?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the Thalorian council members standing across the hall. "In my culture," she said slowly, "that gesture is not simply playful. It is a declaration." Jack blinked. "A declaration of what?" "An alliance," she replied. "A personal bond, witnessed by others. It is rare and binding." Jack's hand tightened around his glass. "Binding? As in a promise of loyalty," she said, lowering her voice. "One that cannot be easily withdrawn without dishonor." The word dishonor echoed in Jack's mind. He didn't know every detail of Thalorian politics, but he'd been in enough briefings to understand that dishonor wasn't something their people took lightly. To dishonor a Thalorian was to invite revenge, not just from the individual, but from their entire clan. He tried to keep his tone casual. So, you're saying, in front of all these people, I just agreed to something I didn't even know about? She gave a small, almost guilty nod. Yes. For a moment they stood there in silence, the hum of the hall around them like a distant storm. Jack thought about the human delegation's position in the Accord. Earth had no large fleets, yet no colonies beyond a handful of moons. They were still dependent on trade with other civilizations. And now, apparently, one unexpected kiss had just thrown them into the middle of a political commitment. Lyra straightened her shoulders, the sparkle of her skin catching the light again. We should speak to the council before rumors spread too far, she said. But from the corner of her eye, she could already see other delegates slipping out of the hall, no doubt rushing to tell their governments what they'd witnessed. Jack took a deep breath. This was supposed to be an easy evening. A few polite conversations, maybe some strange alien food, and then back to his quarters. Instead, he had just become part of an interstellar promise he barely understood. Somewhere deep inside, though, a part of him couldn't help but feel that, whatever, storm was coming. It was going to change far more than just a diplomatic schedule. By the time Jack returned to his quarters that night, the station felt different. He could feel it in the way people glanced at him as he walked past, a little too quickly, a little too curious. Even the automated service drones in the corridors seemed to pause longer when scanning him, as if they somehow knew his name had been whispered in every diplomatic channel before midnight. Jack didn't sleep well. His thoughts kept circling back to the moment in the hall. The kiss itself had been nothing, just a friendly, playful gesture. But the way everyone reacted, the sharp intake of breath, the frozen stares, the murmurs, that told him this wasn't going to vanish overnight. And Lyra's warning echoed in his head. A personal bond, binding, dishonor if broken. When morning came, he barely had time to grab a cup of coffee before his wrist communicator lit up with an urgent message from the human ambassador. My office, now. The ambassador's office was on one of the upper decks, with wide windows overlooking the curve of the station's outer ring. Ambassador Kellen was a tall, silver-haired man with the kind of sharp voice that could cut through a noisy hangar bay. He was pacing when Jack entered. Do you have any idea what you've done? Kellen demanded without preamble. Jack shut the door behind him. If I had to guess, I'd say I accidentally signed a political marriage treaty with my face. This isn't funny, Kellen said, slamming his hand on the desk. Half the Accord thinks Earth just maneuvered its way into a direct alliance with the Thalorian Empire. Do you know what that means? Jack shrugged. More trade? More enemies, Kellen snapped. The Thalorians have rivalries going back centuries, and now, thanks to a playful moment, we're being pulled right into the middle of their mess. Jack ran a hand over his face. So what's the plan? Before Kellen could answer, the office door opened and Lyra stepped in, flanked by two of her people. She didn't look playful now. Her expression was measured, careful, almost regal. We must speak, she said. Kellen crossed his arms. I was just about to call your council. That will not be necessary, Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. The bond has been witnessed. If it is broken, my people will lose face. And if we lose face, there will be consequences. Jack raised an eyebrow. By consequences? You mean war? Lyra's eyes softened for a moment when she looked at him. Not immediately. But the insult would not be forgotten. Ever. Kellen gave a bitter laugh. You realize how dangerous this is for us? Earth isn't ready for a conflict like that. I am aware, she replied, which is why we must make sure the bond is seen not as a trap, but as a partnership. Kellen stared at her. And how do you suggest we do that? She looked directly at Jack. We appear together. We speak together. We let the galaxy see that this was not an accident but a choice. Jack frowned. So, pretend I meant to do it? Her gaze didn't waver. Not pretend. Decide that you mean it now. Jack sat back in the chair. He didn't like the feeling of being boxed into a corner, but he also knew there weren't many other options. If Earth backed out now, it would make them look weak. Worse, dishonorable. And dishonor, in this part of the galaxy, was like painting a target on your own ship. Kellen exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers on the desk. If we do this, it has to be on our terms. We won't be anyone's servant. Agreed, Lyra said. It will be a bond of equals. Jack couldn't help but notice the faint twitch at the corner of Kellen's mouth. Equal bonds weren't exactly common in galactic politics. Most alliances had one side quietly holding the power. If this really happened the way Lyra suggested, it could send ripples through the entire Accord. The rest of the morning was a blur. Jack was escorted from meeting to meeting, some with human officers, others with alien advisors. Everyone had their own theory about what this bond meant, and everyone wanted to make sure their side came out on top. By midday, Jack's head was pounding. When he finally had a moment alone with Lyra in one of the station's quieter gardens, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since last night. Why'd you do it? The kiss, I mean. She tilted her head, her crystalline skin reflecting the soft green glow of the plants around them. I told you. It was playful. Playful for you, he said. For me, it's the start of a diplomatic crisis. She smiled faintly. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is the start of something greater. Jack wasn't sure if she was talking about politics or something more personal. Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was seeing more pieces on this chessboard than he was. By late afternoon, word had already spread further than they imagined. On the station's public broadcast network, commentators were arguing whether this was a masterstroke by humanity or a reckless mistake. Messages from other factions were arriving by the minute, some offering congratulations, others thinly veiled threats. Jack stood by the observation deck that evening, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, ships were already moving, deals were already being made, and plans were already being rewritten, all because of a single moment in the middle of a crowded hall. And deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. By Friday afternoon, the Orion's Edge no longer felt like a space station. It felt like a rumor factory. Every corridor buzzed with conversation. Aliens leaned in close, whispering in languages Jack didn't understand. Groups of traders paused mid-step to glance at him and Lyra when they passed. The tension wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, like a quiet storm building above the horizon. Jack tried to focus on his duties, but it was impossible. Messages kept coming in from Earth's central government asking for updates, demanding explanations, and hinting at possible strategies. Meanwhile, the Thalorian Council had gone into closed-door meetings, refusing to speak to anyone except Lyra. The rest of the Accord's factions were left to guess, and none of them liked guessing when it came to power shifts. It wasn't long before the first threats appeared. Jack was in the human delegation's strategy room when Ambassador Kellen read the latest transmission aloud. To the government of Earth, remove your claim to the Thalorian envoy immediately, or face economic sanctions and restricted travel through our trade sectors. Signed, the Zyran Coalition. Kellen set the tablet down and rubbed his forehead. That's the third warning today. Jack leaned against the wall. Sanctions would hurt, but we could survive them, right? Maybe, Kellen said. But if the Zyran follow through, others might join them. We could be cut off from vital resources, fuel, medical supplies, even certain food imports. We can't risk that. Before Jack could answer, one of the aides burst into the room. Sir, the Kalori delegation is demanding an urgent audience. They say they have information about the Thalorian situation. Kellen exchanged a look with Jack. Get them in here. Moments later, 3 tall, thin Kalori entered, their long coats swaying like liquid metal as they walked. The leader, a pale figure with narrow black eyes, didn't waste time on greetings. "Humans," he said, "you think you've won a prize, but the Thalorian bond is not a gift. It is a chain." Jack stepped forward. "Meaning, Kalori's expression was cold. "You will be drawn into their wars, their debts, their enemies' wrath. Do not think you will remain equals. Once the bond is sealed, it will be the Thalorian way that rules, not yours." Kellen's jaw tightened. "So you're telling us to walk away?" "I am telling you to break the chain before it is forged," the Kalori replied. "Before Saturday." Without another word, the delegation turned and left. The room was silent for a moment. Jack glanced at Kellen. "So, that sounded like a threat." "It was," Kellen said, "and not an idle one." That evening, Jack found Lyra in one of the quieter observation decks, looking out at the swirling colors of a nearby nebula. The reflection of the stars played across her crystal-like skin. "We're getting threats," Jack said, stepping beside her. "Zyron, Kalori, probably more by morning. They want us to walk away." "I know," she said softly. "My people are hearing the same." Jack studied her expression. "Is this bond worth all that? You said it was rare, but you didn't say it was dangerous." She turned to face him, her eyes catching the light like fragments of a star. "Anything that shifts power is dangerous. That is why most avoid it. But sometimes, danger is the only path to change." Jack crossed his arms. "Change for who? For you? For the Thalorians?" "For both of us," she said. "Your people are new to the Accord. You have no deep allies, no real influence. This could change that. But you must be willing to hold your ground." He thought about that for a moment. "And if we don't? Then the old powers will remain as they are, and Earth will stay on the edges, forever waiting for permission to act," she said. "You will not be invited into the real decisions." Jack wanted to argue, but the truth was she wasn't wrong. Earth had been stuck in the role of observer, tolerated but not respected. This bond, accidental or not, had given them a sudden, dangerous spotlight. They stood in silence for a while, watching the slow movement of the nebula. The next day would be Saturday. The Thalorian Council was expected to make a public statement, and Earth would have to respond. By then, the galaxy would know whether this playful kiss had been a blunder to be erased, or the start of something that could reshape the Accord. But as Jack walked back to his quarters, he noticed something new in the air. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was anticipation. The kind that comes before something big. The kind that changes the rules forever. And deep down, he knew they had already crossed a line. There would be no going back. The night before Saturday was restless for everyone on Orion's edge. The station's halls stayed busy well past midnight, not with merchants and travelers, but with delegates and aides rushing between private chambers. Doors opened and closed. Quietly, security officers stood in corners with unreadable faces, and encrypted messages flickered across datapads faster than anyone could keep track of. Jack barely slept. He lay on his bunk, staring at the dim ceiling lights, listening to the faint hum of the station's life support systems. He knew that in just a few hours, the Thalorian Council would decide the fate of the bond. If they declared it official, Earth would be pulled into a permanent alliance. If they rejected it, the insult could push them toward hostility. Either way, the old balance of the Accord was about to crack. At 0700 hours, he was summoned to a private conference room on Deck 12. The walls were sleek, lined with panels that hid communication systems powerful enough to reach any world in the Accord. Ambassador Kellen was already there, along with 3 senior human advisors. Lyra sat across from them, flanked by 2 Thalorian counselors dressed in long, dark cloaks that shimmered faintly when they moved. "Let's skip the opening speeches," Kellen said, his voice firm. "We all know why we're here. We need a decision before the council session this afternoon." One of the Thalorian counselors, a tall figure named Sarath, leaned forward. The bond was made. It was witnessed. To question it now would show weakness. Kellen narrowed his eyes. Or it could be seen as wisdom, recognizing when something was done in error. There are no errors in public gestures of loyalty, Sarath replied sharply. The galaxy saw it. To undo it now is to say our customs mean nothing. Jack watched the tension build between them. This wasn't just about a gesture anymore. It was about pride, status, and the invisible threads that held alliances together. Lyra's voice cut through the argument, calm but commanding. We are wasting time. The truth is simple. The bond cannot be erased without harm to both sides. But if we move forward together, we can shape it to our advantage. Kellen turned to her. And what advantage do you think we get out of this? Influence, she said without hesitation. For the first time, the smaller worlds are watching Earth. They see you standing beside us. They see the possibility of a new balance. Right now, the old powers are afraid you might tip the scale. Kellen didn't answer right away. He glanced at Jack. What do you think? You started this. Jack felt the weight of the room pressing on him. He didn't want to admit it, but Lyra had a point. If we walk away now, we look weak. If we move forward, we'll have to deal with the fallout. But at least we'll be in the game. Sarath nodded in approval. The human understands. Kellen sighed and rubbed his temple. If we agree, it has to be on equal terms. No one owns anyone. We act together, or not at all. Lyra's lips curved in the faintest smile. Agreed. The discussion shifted quickly to details. Joint trade agreements, shared security patrols, mutual defense clauses. Jack listened, realizing that in just a few short days, this playful kiss had turned into a blueprint for a new political structure. The more they spoke, the more he saw how carefully Lyra had been steering events. She hadn't just reacted to the kiss, she had turned it into a lever to move the galaxy. By late morning, the human delegation and the Thalorian representatives had reached a draft agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to present to the wider accord. The session would be held in the Grand Hall at 1400 hours, broadcast across the station and to every major world in the accord. As the meeting ended, Lyra caught Jack's arm before he left. You understand what this means now? Yeah, he said quietly. It means there's no going back. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Good. The hours before the session passed in a blur. Jack changed into his formal uniform, the deep navy jacket with silver trim that marked him as part of Earth's diplomatic corps. He stood before a mirror, straightening the collar, and thought about how strange it was that his life had shifted so drastically in just 2 days. When he arrived at the Grand Hall, the air was thick with anticipation. Delegates from every corner of the Accord filled the tiered seating, their voices a low, constant murmur. The center platform, ringed by holographic projectors, waited for the speakers. Kellen gave Jack a nod. You'll be up there with us. This is your moment as much as ours. Lyra joined them, her silver robes flowing like water as she walked. Together, the human and Thalorian delegations stepped onto the platform. The hall quieted instantly. All eyes turned toward them. Jack felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions pressing down on him. He didn't know exactly what the next hour would bring, only that by the time it was over, the galaxy would see them in a new light. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered if this was really just about politics anymore, or if it had become something much bigger. The grand hall of Orion's Edge was so quiet that Jack could hear the faint hum of the air circulators above. Thousands of eyes were locked on the platform where the human and Thalorian delegations stood side by side. The tiered seating rose, high, packed with representatives from every major faction in the Accord, their colors and insignias forming a swirling patchwork of galactic politics. The moment felt bigger than any meeting Jack had ever attended. Ambassador Kellen stepped forward, first. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the chamber. Honored members of the Accord, we come before you to address the events of Thursday evening and the questions they have raised. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall, but no one dared interrupt. Kellen glanced briefly at Jack before continuing. Yes, a gesture was made, a gesture with deep meaning in Thalorian culture. And yes, it was witnessed by many of you. Some have called it an accident, others have called it a trap. We call it an opportunity. Jack could feel the tension rising. Every faction was waiting to see which way this would go, either toward alliance or disaster. Kellen gestured to Lyra. She stepped forward, her crystal-like skin shimmering under the lights. Her voice had the calm authority of someone who had been trained to command a room. In the Thalorian Empire, a bond such as this is rare. It is a declaration of trust, of loyalty. Many believe it must follow ancient traditions, that it cannot be shared equally between different worlds. Today, we choose to prove them wrong. The hall stirred again, some in approval, others clearly unsettled. Lyra went on. We will not deny what was witnessed. The bond stands, but it will not be the bond of master and servant. It will be a bond of equals. We will act together, defend together, and decide together. This is our choice. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jack saw several smaller world delegates exchanging quick glances. Equal bonds were almost unheard of in the Accord. They broke the old model where the stronger side always dictated terms. If Earth and Thalor made this work, it could inspire others to demand the same. Kellen stepped forward again. Let it be known, humanity will not shy away from responsibility. We did not seek this moment, but we accept it. And in accepting it, we declare that the future of the Accord will be built, not on fear or control, but on cooperation and respect. The hall erupted into noise. Some delegates applauded, others shouted objections. Jack spotted the Zyran representatives whispering furiously into their comms, no doubt preparing to send an angry report home. But among the smaller delegations, Jack saw cautious smiles and even a few nods of approval. Then, in a move that no one had planned, Lyra turned to Jack. Lieutenant Rains, will you speak? For a moment, Jack froze. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't trained for speeches that would be broadcast to the entire galaxy. But when he stepped forward, the noise in the hall faded again. I'm not a politician, he began, his voice steady but unpolished. I'm a soldier. I've seen what happens when different worlds don't trust each other. I've seen good people hurt because leaders couldn't work together. If this bond means we can do better than that, then I'm in. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. He paused, scanning the hall. 2 days ago, this was just a misunderstanding. Now it's a choice, and I choose to stand with the Thalorians. Not because I have to, but because I want to. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't tense, it was thoughtful. The words weren't polished diplomacy, but they were honest. And honesty was rare in that room. Finally, the presiding officer of the Accord, a tall being draped in gold and green fabrics, rose from their seat. The bond between Earth and Thaler is acknowledged by this assembly. Its terms, as stated, will be recorded in the Accord's treaty archives. The statement was formal, but it was also final. The hall filled again with noise, a mix of applause, protests, and hurried conversations. The decision had been made. As the delegations left the platform, Lyra gave Jack a faint smile. "You spoke well." "I just told the truth," he said. "That," she replied, "is why it worked." Outside the Grand Hall, news drones floated in every direction, recording interviews and capturing images of the newly confirmed alliance. In less than an hour, the story would be on every major channel in the galaxy. Jack and Lyra walked side by side down the long corridor toward the docking bays. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The weight of what had just happened was still sinking in. The galaxy had shifted, and there was no undoing it now. By Saturday afternoon, humans had changed everything. By Saturday evening, the Orion's edge felt like the center of the galaxy. The Grand Hall announcement had been broadcast across every Accord network, and the station's main promenade was now packed with reporters, traders, and curious onlookers. News drones floated overhead like glowing insects, their lenses following Jack and Lyra whenever they appeared in public. The reactions were instant and intense. Smaller worlds sent messages of support, some cautiously worded, others openly praising. The Alliance, the Zyran Coalition, and the Kalori State both issued statements of grave concern, accusing Earth and Thylor of destabilizing the Accord. Other major powers remained silent, which was its own kind of answer. They were watching, waiting to see how this new partnership played out before committing themselves. Jack sat in the human delegation's lounge, watching the news feeds on the wide display wall. Every channel seemed to be running the same image. Him and Lyra standing side by side on the Grand Hall platform. In one feed, political analysts argued about whether the alliance would last. In another, a historian explained how no human in recorded history had ever been bound by a Thalorian bond before. The galaxy had found something new to talk about, and it was them. Ambassador Kellen entered the lounge, his uniform jacket unbuttoned for the first time all day. "Well," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Congratulations, Lieutenant. You've managed to rewrite our diplomatic standing in 48 hours. Jack smirked. Was that a compliment? Kellen sat down across from him. "Let's call it acknowledgement. You did well in the hall. That speech, it landed with people. Some of the smaller delegations are already asking for private meetings." "That was fast," Jack said. "Politics moves fastest when someone shakes the table," Kellen replied. "And right now, you've shaken it hard." Before Jack could respond, Lyra appeared in the doorway. She looked composed, but Jack could tell from the faint tightness in her voice that she'd been dealing with her own wave of political chaos. "The Thalorian Council has been in continuous session since the announcement," she said. "Half of them are furious. The other half are intrigued." "Meaning they see an opportunity," Kellen guessed. Lyra nodded. "They know this. Bond puts us in a position to influence not just each other, but the Accord itself. But they also know it puts us in the crosshairs of those who don't want change." Jack leaned back in his chair. "So, when do the crosshairs turn into actual attacks?" Lyra glanced at him seriously. "Sooner than you think. Political pressure will be the first weapon. If that fails, some will turn to other means." Jack didn't need her to explain what other means meant. Sabotage, infiltration, even assassination, the galaxy had its share of shadows. That night, the first signs came. A cargo shipment meant for the human delegation was suddenly delayed by Zyran customs officers. A scheduled meeting with the Kalori was abruptly canceled without explanation. Even the station's automated maintenance systems began reporting errors in sections of the human delegation's quarters. Nothing was openly hostile, but the message was clear. Resistance had already begun. In the Thalorian sector of the station, similar problems appeared. Important communications were intercepted. A diplomatic shuttle reported a near collision with an unmanned cargo hauler. The accidents felt too precise to be random. Jack and Lyra met in a quiet observation room late that night, the vast starscape beyond the glass windows giving them a sense of both wonder and danger. "You were right," Jack said. "They're coming for us already. They fear what we represent," Lyra said softly. "Fear is a powerful motivator. It makes enemies reckless, but it also makes them dangerous." Jack studied her face, seeing the calm determination beneath her composed expression. "So what's our move?" She turned to face him fully. "We don't react to every provocation. That's what they want. We keep building alliances with those who see the value in change. The more worlds we bring to our side, the harder it will be for anyone to break us apart." Jack nodded slowly. "And if they try anyway?" Her eyes held his without flinching. "Then we remind them why the bond was made. Not because we were forced, but because we chose it." They stood there for a while, silent, watching the slow rotation of the station against the endless night. By the end of Saturday, trade routes were already shifting. 2 smaller worlds announced new trade talks with Earth and Thalor. Several others hinted they might follow. In just one day, the old political map had begun to redraw itself. Jack didn't know what the next week would bring, whether the alliance would hold, or whether it would be tested by something far worse than political games. But he did know one thing. The moment they had stood together on that platform, something had changed. The galaxy was moving. And now, it was moving with them. By Sunday morning, Orion's edge had settled into a strange new rhythm. The chaos of the previous days had not disappeared, but it had shifted. The urgent whispers in the corridors were less about surprise and more about calculation. Delegates, who had once ignored the humans, now sought them out for quiet conversations. Thalorian envoys moved through the halls with a new air of authority, as if the bond with Earth had already strengthened their position. Jack woke early, his communicator buzzing with updates. Overnight, 3 more minor worlds had contacted the human delegation requesting trade talks. 2 others had sent messages to Lyra's council asking about mutual defense arrangements. What had begun as a diplomatic accident was quickly becoming a political movement. When Jack met Lyra in the Thalorian gardens, the place was almost empty. A soft mist drifted between the glowing plants, casting pale light on the crystal paths. She was standing near the center, watching a cluster of silver-petaled flowers open to the artificial dawn. "You're early," Jack said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice calm but thoughtful. "Too many messages, too many questions. Everyone wants to know what this bond means for them." Jack stepped closer. "What do you tell them?" "The truth," she said. "That it means nothing unless we prove it matters. Words are easy. Action will decide everything." Jack nodded. "And action means what? Signing a few trade deals?" "Action means standing together when the first real test comes," Lyra said. "It will come soon, Jack. The old powers won't let this stand without trying to break it." He didn't doubt her. The subtle sabotage from the night before had been only the beginning. Somewhere, someone was already planning something bigger. Later, that day Jack joined Ambassador Kellen for a private strategy session. The ambassador was studying a holographic map of trade routes and political alliances. Several were marked in red. "Every red line," Kellen explained, "is a path that could be cut if the Zyran and Kalori decide to coordinate. We'll need backup from the new allies we've made." "Think they'll actually stick their necks out for us?" Jack asked. Kellen gave a thin smile. "They will if they believe you and Lyra can protect them. That's why this bond is bigger than just our 2 worlds. It's a test case for a new kind of politics." By evening, the first meeting of the newly formed Earth-Thalor Alliance Council was held in a secure conference room. Jack, Lyra, Kellen, and 3 Thalorian counselors sat around a long table, discussing priorities. Defense cooperation, resource sharing, diplomatic outreach. Every point was carefully debated, It wasn't easy. The Thalorian counselors still spoke in formal, guarded language, weighing every word. The human advisors were more direct, sometimes clashing with their counterparts. But underneath the careful posturing, there was an unspoken understanding. Both sides needed this to work. After the meeting, Jack and Lyra walked together through the quieter upper decks. The station's artificial night cycle had begun, dimming the lights and filling the halls with a muted hum. "You know," Jack said, "2 days ago I thought this was going to ruin everything." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it might actually fix something," he admitted. "Not everything, but maybe enough to matter." Lyra's eyes softened. "That's how change begins. Not with a perfect plan, with a single choice that grows into something more." They stopped at one of the large observation windows. Beyond the glass, the stars drifted slowly past, a river of light in the endless dark. Ships moved in and, out of the docking bays, small points of motion against the stillness of space. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't done it?" Jack asked. Lyra tilted her head. "The kiss?" "Yeah." She smiled faintly. "Then you and I would still be two diplomats from distant worlds, speaking politely at receptions and pretending the galaxy's problems were too big for us to change. Instead, here we are." Jack chuckled. "Here we are, making half the galaxy nervous." "Good," she said. "Nervous leaders make new choices." They stood there for a while, neither speaking. The view stretched on forever, a reminder of how small they were, and how much weight a single moment could carry. In the days to come, Jack knew there would be harder challenges. The threats would grow sharper, the stakes higher. But he also knew something else. They weren't alone anymore. The bond that had started as a misunderstanding had become something real, not because tradition demanded it, but because they chose it every time they stood side by side. And as the station's lights dimmed further into simulated night, Jack realized that sometimes the smallest actions, a gesture, a word, a touch, could shift the course of history. By Sunday night, the galaxy was already different. By next week, it might be unrecognizable. But whatever came, he and Lyra would face it together. Far out beyond the station, the stars waited, and the future waited with them.